The Chosen Season 5, Episode 2. The stakes have never been higher, and the consequences of every choice are becoming more apparent. But as we watch the story unfold, one thing becomes clear: what we thought we knew about Jesus. His disciples in the coming days might just be flipped on its head. Betrayal is in the air, and it's closer than we ever imagined. The episode opens with a shift in focus, one that surprises and challenges our expectations. Right off the bat, we're introduced to a significant flashback that dives deeper into Rama's backstory and the complex relationship between Thomas and Caiaphas. Up until now, it's been easy to assume that Thomas was just another disciple who followed Jesus wholeheartedly. But this episode pulls back the curtain on his internal struggles, showing us his doubts and fears. When Thomas meets Caiaphas in the marketplace, it's more than just an encounter between two people. It's the moment when everything begins to change. Before, it seemed like Caiaphas saw Thomas as someone he could be proud of, a follower of the faith, a son. But now we start to see a deeper, more tragic layer to their connection. Thomas, still reeling from the loss of Rama, and the questions surrounding her death, confronts Caiaphas, revealing his pain and confusion. Jesus didn't kill Rama. Thomas insists to Rama's mother a powerful statement that not only reflects his own doubts, but also his loyalty to Jesus. But here's the twist. This conversation sets the stage for a much deeper betrayal that will unfold over the next few episodes. What's even more striking is the possible character arc being set up for Caiaphas' family. We've always known Caiaphas as a man of power, someone who follows the letter of the law, but could this tragic encounter with Thomas spark a change in him? Could the pain in Thomas's voice and the sorrow in Rama's mother's eyes begin to shift something inside Caiaphas? The seeds of betrayal are already being sown here, not just for Judas, but for everyone involved. And then there's the emotional weight of Thomas's words. He doesn't just express doubts about the events surrounding Rama's death. He outright challenges everything Caiaphas and the religious leaders have held onto. This is the beginning of Thomas's own journey, one that will test his faith and loyalty in ways we didn't expect. In this one scene, we see that Thomas is not just questioning the actions of those around him, he's questioning everything. And this is only the beginning. The flashback, though, brief, adds layers of emotional depth to the episode, making what happens later in the episode even more impactful. This emotional setup helps us understand the complexity of the relationships, not only between Thomas and Caiaphas, but also between Jesus and his followers. These are not just characters on a screen, they are real people struggling with loss, faith, and doubt. And as the episode progresses, we can see that the choices made in these early moments will have far-reaching consequences. By the time the episode transitions to the next sequence, the weight of this encounter between Thomas and Caiaphas hangs in the air. It's clear that something bigger is brewing. And yet there's an ominous sense of foreshadowing that lingers. What does this moment mean for Thomas? What does it mean for Caiaphas? The questions are piling up, and the answers are about to come crashing down. As the episode progresses, we feel the tension building not just between the disciples and the religious leaders, but within the very heart of the story. The scene that follows, Jesus' explosive confrontation with the money changers in the temple, shatters any illusion of calm and presents a powerful turning point. Up until now, we've seen Jesus as the teacher, the healer, the gentle shepherd, but in this episode, we see a side of him that is filled with righteous anger. The setup for this moment is brilliant in its simplicity. We've witnessed the growing corruption of the temple, how the sacred space meant for worship and prayer has been turned into a marketplace, a place of profit and greed. The money changers were charging exorbitant prices for sacrificial animals and manipulating the people's need to pay the temple tax. But it's not just about the money, it's about the corruption of what was supposed to be a holy place. Jesus' anger in this moment isn't just because people are being taken advantage of, it's because the sanctity of God's house has been violated. What's truly striking about this scene is how The Chosen portrays the intensity of the moment. This isn't a calm, controlled response from Jesus. This is raw, unfiltered emotion. He takes off his backpack, pulls out a whip, and begins to overturn tables. The chaos that ensues is palpable. The sound of coins scattering, the frightened cries of the sellers, and the shocked faces of the disciples. But the real power of this scene lies in the fact that Jesus is doing this alone. He's one man standing up against a system of corruption that has held sway for years. It's not just a confrontation, it's a declaration. For the disciples, this moment is confusing. Andrew's words, "He's gone mad," reflect the shock and disbelief that everyone feels as they witness this uncharacteristic outburst. But the power of this scene lies in its symbolism. Jesus is cleansing the temple, driving out the sin that has taken root in the very heart of worship. The chaos the overturned tables, the fleeing animals, all of it represents sin being driven out of God's house. But it's not just about physical tables being overturned, it's about overturning the corrupt systems that have infiltrated the faith itself. Jesus is confronting the very heart of the religious establishment, and his anger is not just righteous, it's born out of his deep love and anguish for the people who have been exploited in the name of God. As Jesus stands in the center of this turmoil, it's clear that he's not just taking on the money changers. He's challenging the status quo, challenging the temple leaders, and challenging the people to see their faith in a new light. The disciples may be confused by what they're witnessing, but for Jesus, this is a necessary act. The temple was meant to be a place of prayer, a space for connection with God, not a place for greed and exploitation. Jesus' wrath in this moment isn't just about punishment, it's about purification. He's setting the stage for the radical change that is about to come, a change that will shake the very foundation of the Jewish faith and in turn, the world. But this moment is just the beginning. As powerful as this scene is, it sets up a deeper, more profound conflict. The religious leaders are already taking notice, and the tension between Jesus and the establishment is reaching a boiling point. The seeds of betrayal are planted here, as we know that Jesus' actions in the temple will lead to his eventual arrest and crucifixion. What makes this moment even more chilling is that the religious leaders know exactly what Jesus' actions mean. They recognize that his challenge to their authority can't be ignored. The battle lines are drawn, and there's no turning back. This is where the plot thickens, and the betrayal that will follow becomes even more inevitable. In the midst of all this chaos, we're reminded of the weight of Jesus' mission. His actions aren't just symbolic, they're part of a much larger plan. This is the moment where everything shifts, where the tension between the Son of God and the world's powers becomes undeniable. It's the beginning of the end, and the moment where the heart of betrayal starts to take shape. The temple may be cleansed, but the seeds of what's to come have been planted, and the fallout will be devastating. As the dust settles from the chaos in the temple, we move into the political landscape that is becoming increasingly complicated and tense. The episode takes us deeper into the world of the religious elite, where power manipulation and fear rule the day. A pivotal moment occurs when Caiaphas meets with Herod Antipas, two men who represent different yet equally dangerous forces in the conflict brewing around Jesus. The tension between these two figures speaks volumes about the growing divide between the political and religious leaders and the role they will play in the coming betrayal. From the outset, it's clear that Herod Antipas is far more concerned with maintaining his own power than with the truth of Jesus' message. He's paranoid and fearful, haunted by the thought that Jesus might be the risen John the Baptist, a ghost from his past that he can't shake. This fear becomes a key element in understanding why the religious leaders are so desperate to silence Jesus. Herod's anxiety is palpable, and it's not just about preserving his throne, it's about protecting his reputation and securing his place in history. He's not concerned with justice or morality, he's concerned with self-preservation, a trait that makes him dangerous. In his conversation with Caiaphas, Herod's desperation is clear. He believes that Jesus is a threat to everything he's worked for, and his fear will ultimately drive him to make choices that will contribute to the downfall of both Jesus and himself. Then we have Caiaphas, who until now has been a man of reason, a political strategist, who has been carefully balancing the needs of his position with the growing unrest among the people. However, in this episode, we see his true nature begin to emerge. Caiaphas is not just concerned with the faith, he's a man who understands the weight of his decisions on a far larger scale. His meeting with Herod reveals his pragmatism and his willingness to do whatever it takes to protect the religious system he has built his life around. He's not just trying to preserve the temple, he's trying to maintain control over a fragile, volatile situation. What becomes clear here is that for Caiaphas, Jesus is not just a threat to his faith, but to his very power and influence. The conversation between Caiaphas and Herod becomes even more chilling when the topic of Lazarus comes up. Herod, fearing that Jesus might be raising the dead, suggests that Lazarus be killed in order to stop the potential spread of Jesus' power. This moment is both shocking and revealing. It shows how far the leaders are willing to go to silence anyone who stands in the way of their authority. They see the resurrection of Lazarus as a symbol of Jesus' growing influence, and in their eyes, the only way to stop this movement is through drastic measures. But what's truly unsettling is that this conversation shows the complete lack of concern for justice or truth. They're not trying to understand Jesus. They're trying to control the narrative to eliminate any threats to their control over the people. As we watch this political maneuvering unfold, it's impossible not to feel the weight of the choices these men are making. Every decision, every word spoken, is setting the stage for the ultimate betrayal. Caiaphas, already deeply troubled by the threat Jesus poses, is now faced with an even greater dilemma: how to preserve his power without completely losing his moral footing. But the pressure is mounting, and the actions of Herod and the religious leaders will push him to make choices that will ultimately lead to the betrayal of the very man he has been watching so closely. What's so chilling about this moment is that the power dynamics are already at play, with Herod and Caiaphas both jockeying for position in a world where moral decisions are secondary to political survival. This is not just a fight for faith, it's a fight for control. In the midst of this, we see the deepening cracks in the relationship between the disciples and Jesus. While Jesus' actions in the temple have left them shaken and confused, the growing political tension only adds to their uncertainty. They're witnessing firsthand how powerful forces are being set in motion, forces that will inevitably pull them all into the storm. But the political leaders are only a part of this equation. Judas, who has already started questioning Jesus' actions and intentions, is beginning to show his true colors. We see him slowly starting down the path that will lead to his ultimate betrayal, and it's this tension, the growing divide between faith and power, that will drive the next steps in the story. The political maneuvering between Caiaphas and Herod isn't just a subplot, it's the backdrop against which the deepest betrayals will unfold, and it's this collision of forces that will lead to the ultimate tragedy. As we reach the final moments of The Chosen Season 5, Episode 2, the tension continues to rise, and the looming specter of betrayal grows ever closer. The episode has already given us glimpses of the powerful forces at play, the political maneuvering of Caiaphas and Herod, the personal struggles of Peter as he strives to become the leader he's called to be, and the moments of chaos in the temple that showed us the righteous anger of Jesus. But in the final moments, we see the quiet before the storm, the calm that precedes the storm of betrayal that will shake the very foundation of everything the disciples have come to know. The events set in motion during this episode will eventually lead to the greatest act of treachery the world has ever known: the betrayal of Jesus by one of his own. While the episode has primarily focused on Peter's internal struggle and the political tensions mounting around Jesus' growing influence, the final scenes shift to a quieter, yet infinitely more dangerous reality. The seeds of betrayal planted over the course of the episode begin to come to fruition as we see Judas's growing dissatisfaction and suspicion toward Jesus. It's clear that Judas's heart is being pulled in a dangerous direction, but the show does an excellent job of showing how gradual and subtle this shift is. Judas isn't immediately consumed by greed or anger. He doesn't suddenly decide to betray Jesus in an act of malice. Instead, it's a slow burn, a gradual hardening of his heart, a growing sense of confusion and betrayal, and the gradual loss of trust in Jesus' mission. This internal struggle is expertly depicted by The Chosen. Judas's slow descent into betrayal is not done in one dramatic moment. Instead, it's a process that takes place over time as Judas grapples with his disappointment, his confusion, and his growing suspicion. It's easy to look at Judas and see him as the villain in the story, but this episode humanizes him in a way that makes his eventual betrayal all the more heartbreaking. Judas is not evil from the start. He is a man who is struggling with his faith and with his understanding of what Jesus' mission truly is. He's a man who at one point believed in Jesus with all his heart, but is now beginning to doubt. And that doubt, however subtle, is dangerous. At the same time, the show continues to build on the political backdrop with Caiaphas and the religious leaders setting their sights on Jesus. The growing animosity between the religious leaders and Jesus becomes more pronounced as the episode progresses, and it's clear that the stakes are rising. What we are witnessing is not just a personal betrayal of one man by another, it is a larger systemic betrayal. The religious system represented by Caiaphas has been corrupted and is now actively seeking to eliminate the very person who threatens its existence. Jesus' message of love, forgiveness, and the coming kingdom of God is a direct challenge to the religious authorities who have built their power on a foundation of control, fear, and manipulation. But here's the real shocker. The religious authorities are not the only ones betraying Jesus. Judas, one of the 12 closest followers of Jesus, will ultimately be the one to carry out the final act of treachery. The irony of this is not lost on the viewer, especially when you consider the relationship that Judas has had with Jesus. Judas wasn't just an outsider, he was part of the inner circle. He saw firsthand the miracles, the teachings, the love that Jesus offered. He was trusted with responsibilities, and he was in a position of great influence. Yet it's Judas, the one who had been closest to Jesus, who will become the instrument of his betrayal. It's fascinating to think about the psychology behind Judas's eventual decision. What exactly drives him to betray Jesus? Is it simply greed, or is it something more complex? Does Judas feel abandoned or disillusioned by Jesus? Does he feel that Jesus isn't living up to his expectations of the Messiah? Or is it a combination of all these factors, his personal doubts, his frustrations, and his sense of betrayal, that lead him to take the ultimate step? The show leaves us with more questions than answers, and it's this ambiguity that makes Judas's betrayal all the more compelling. We understand the motivations behind his actions, but we are left to grapple with the tragic reality that a man who had been so close to Jesus could fall so far. As the episode comes to a close, we are left with a profound sense of foreboding. The calm before the storm is almost palpable, and the viewer can sense that things are about to spiral out of control. The storm that is brewing, both in the hearts of the disciples and in the political and religious landscape, is about to come to a head. The betrayal of Jesus, which has been slowly building over the course of the season, will soon erupt, and the consequences will be far-reaching. The stage is set, and the pieces are in place for the ultimate act of treachery. Yet in the midst of this tension, there is a glimmer of hope. Because while Judas's betrayal is heartbreaking, it's also a necessary part of the greater plan. Jesus knows what's coming. He knows the pain, the betrayal, and the suffering that will come with it. But he also knows that this is the path to redemption. Judas's actions, tragic as they are, will set in motion the events that will lead to the crucifixion and ultimately to the resurrection. In this final section, we are reminded that even in the darkest moments, there is a greater plan unfolding, one that will bring light and salvation to the world. And while the betrayal of Jesus will be one of the most painful moments in the story, it will also be the beginning of something beautiful, something that will change the course of history forever. The weight of what is to come is undeniable, and yet, as we watch these final moments unfold, we are left with an undeniable truth. Even in the midst of betrayal, God is still at work. The darkness may be deepening, but the light is about to shine brighter than ever before. Judas's betrayal, while a moment of great tragedy, will ultimately lead to the victory of the cross, and that victory will echo through eternity. As we look ahead to the coming episodes, we know that the storm is on the horizon, and when it hits, it will change everything. But for now, we are left in the quiet before the storm watching, as the characters we've come to know and love grapple with their own doubts, fears, and frustrations, knowing that the greatest betrayal in history is just around the corner.